Celia Ouellette. I'm the CEO of the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice, and I'm here with Jamira Burley. Jamira, I'm just going to leave you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Jamira Burley. I'm an activist and a social impact consultant working on issues related to gun violence and criminal justice reform.
Yeah, and the really not secret is that Jamira recently joined the RBIJ team, which we're super excited about. So Jamira, we've got like 15 minutes to tell the people listening to this video why they should care about criminal justice reform in America, what's going wrong, why this moment is different, and how we're gonna create change together. So let's just kind of name it. Let's just start by kind of naming it. Like, what's going wrong in America right now, and what's been going wrong? Like, why is everybody hearing about this and reading about this? How did we get here?
I mean, the short answer is everything is wrong. Everything is going wrong. But to be honest, I think what we're now seeing in so many ways is that America has never fully dealt with the racial divide within this country. It has never really dealt with the racial injustices within this country and how it's so rooted within our culture. And I think what we're now seeing is a reckoning across so many different issues. And criminal justice, unfortunately, is seen as the catalyst for a lot of those conversations because US represents less than 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the prisoners. And yet we also recognize that humans are not naturally born and that Americans are not more inherently violent than others.
Yeah.
But we continue to arrest folks at such astronomical rates, and many of them being people of color. A lot of it is rooted in the racial ideologies and practices within this country that I think is finally not only making its way to mainstream, but also to the international stage.
Yeah, and I mean, even for me, like before RBIJ, I was a death penalty defense lawyer, and when I took on a new case, I would get the name of somebody or the county that they were in, and honestly, before even finding out what they'd done, I'd want to know what the color of that skin of that person was, because that would tell me how hard this case was going to be.
Yeah,
that would tell me if we're going to settle this case. That would tell me if we're going to have a shot at trial, and that is something that should never be systemized. It should never be kind of part of a system, but it is, and it has been for a really long time. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing when people talk to me is like, how do we respond to this emergency, and how do we respond to this situation? And I kind of my response to that is like, this isn't an emergency. This has been going on for years. This is just the lid coming off. This is just the eyes being opened. This is just the moment when people are seeing things that those of us who've worked in criminal justice issues or in criminal justice systems or in and out of jails or have had family members in and out of jails have seen for decades. It's just now it's visible, more visible.
Exactly. I think it's easy to assume that this is a new problem, but yeah. I think it would be a lie to pretend as if this is not a generational issue that have destroyed entire families and communities. And I think it's not enough to say, let's release all the prisoners without also thinking about healing and reconciliation for all the past generations that have also been impacted, and recognizing again that criminal justice reform is representative of so many other deeper systematic problems within this country, and that the top of the problem is the vast majority of folks who are still locked up.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk, and I know we're going to talk in a minute about why businesses should care about justice reform, and like why this is relevant to businesses and what impact that they can have, and the sort of social reason for engaging on justice reform, like the social and community imperatives for caring about justice reform are not different from the business ones, in that when a community is suffering, a business is suffering. The businesses are only as strong as its workforce and the community that it serves. And when you have, if you are trying as a business to be engaged in and express like a nuanced commitment to racial justice and racial equity, then you have to understand that the causes of that include the justice system, and the symptoms of that include the justice system. So if the justice system isn't, a feature on your company's plan about responding to and combating problems of racial inequality, then you're missing a huge component of this. It's like kind of, you know, trying to fight cancer with no surgeon. You know, you're just kind of like locking one of the most important factors for fixing this out of the room. So maybe this is, like you mentioned a little bit about restoration and rehabilitation, and it'd be great to kind of talk about like what we need to do to change, like where are the kind of sparks of hope, and how can this be changed? Like how can we go from where we are now to something that is more positive and hopeful and community oriented, do you think?
I think two things. One, I think it's intersectionality, right? It's recognizing that none of these issues are standalone issues. And to your point, it was cute 5 years ago to say that businesses should care about social justice, right? That they should write it in within their company plans, and that they should donate these big checks of money. But if it wasn't reflective in the internal policies and practices of the organization, those companies are now being called out because it's inauthentic. But at the same time, there's something to be said about if we're going to create solutions, how can companies actually reckon with its own history and the role that it's played that has helped to facilitate the continuation of this problem, while also recognizing the unique position that it's in, because companies oftentimes have the air of politicians in a way of influence that the average American don't. And that's what we're now seeing in many of the backlash that young people have towards business leaders, is the fact that politicians oftentimes serve deference to business leaders that they don't to the community, which is why you see these billionaires and these bankers getting off of time, because they themselves are not, adhering to the same criminal justice system that the average American is, or the average Black person is. And so the role, I think, of business, or how we can move forward, is one, businesses first recognizing that they can't outwardly promote these ideologies in order to boost morale with their employees or their customers without first internalizing those same values. And at the same time, it's recognizing that businesses have a unique value, and they have access and privilege to a point where they can actually influence policy at a much quicker pace than the average American. And also, yes, mass incarceration is $1 billion industry. It actually might be $1 trillion industry at this moment, but that's a very short-term gain if the average young person, particularly millennials and Gen Zs, who are so consumed with where they shop, what they buy, who they support, is representative of their values. If businesses think that they can continue down this road with in a sustainable way, that it isn't going to impact them generationally.
Yeah, I mean, there's just everything that you say, and there's so much to unpack there. But when we talk about like why businesses should care, I think that the current generation and every generation below it is going to place purpose and corporate responsibility and corporate citizenship as a primary factor. There was some fantastic data that was recently published by Porter & Valley that said 35% of current employees are looking to move jobs because they think their current employer does not do enough around social justice issues. And I completely agree with you, like gone are the days where it was cute to engage in social justice, and like here are the days where it is like it will be fatal if you don't engage in social justice issues. It's a matter of survival.
Yeah, it's going to impact your bottom line, and that's just not from the PR standpoint. It's also from the employee standpoint. If you can't attract and retain new employees at a time in which their values are being compromised, what does that say for your ability to be able to harness this talent and not force them to go elsewhere? Yeah,
totally. And with regard to what the business community does for the campaign community, I think you're so right. It's like some of the outrage toward businesses right now, some of the cancel culture that we're seeing is because businesses have the key to the door and they're not using it. And it kind of seems like, well, maybe before you were worried that you didn't want to use the key to the door because it would affect your bottom line. We've just discussed that. That's not really the case anymore. It's like, why aren't you using the key to the door? Like when we started RBIJ, it came out of the campaign community. We are working with our colleagues, like 9 times out of 10, when we said to them, like, who who do you need, or what do you need to like push you over the final mile here with this campaign that you probably spent years cultivating. 9 times out of 10, that was the name of a business or a business leader that they said, well, if only insert business here were on our side, we'd surely have done this by now. We'd surely be, over that line. So the campaign community actually really wants businesses to be valuable allies. They don't necessarily always know how to do that, which is exactly what we're trying to do, but they do want businesses to be their allies, and they do want businesses by their side because they recognize that businesses have the key to the door and that they need it. And if businesses are kind of equipped right, that they will hopefully make good choices about unlocking doors. But maybe this leads to, is this moment different, right? We had COVID, which kind of sharpened the focus on social issues broadly, because I think there was a great sense that the worst off were going to get worse off in the aftermath of COVID, that vulnerable people were going to be more vulnerable and more exposed as being vulnerable. And so there kind of came this, like, the S in ESG moment, the social impact moment kind of got bigger. Then came George Floyd. And I kind of want to say the George Floyd's up, right? Because this is not one person that sparked a movement. This has been many people over a long time, which narrowed the focus again on justice reform as a major issue. Do you feel like this moment is different? Do you feel it's enduring, or do you think we're going to kind of hit the snooze button again?
It's so hard. I think some days I'm like, especially after being in many of the protests, I'm like, this moment feels very different than 5 years ago, right? Before I joined the Hillary campaign, I was in Baton Rouge shortly after, during the Baton Rouge uprise. And before that, I was in Baltimore during the Baltimore uprise. And for me, those moments feel very different than this moment, just because of the range of folks who are speaking up and the type of things that they're saying, right? That it's not just these one-off police officers, this one-off police precinct. Is actually saying this is indicative of an entire broken system, or a system that's working exactly how it was designed to work, right? Yeah. So to that extent, I do feel like this moment is different. At the same time, I question whether or not people are feeling the trauma fatigue of this moment, right? Because again, it's easy to look at criminal justice as a silo issue without recognizing that we are currently dealing with a global pandemic, right? We're currently dealing with political uprising or racial uprising, not just in the US, but around the world. And we're dealing with climate change. So I think a part of me also feels like there is a moment that we're going to reach if we don't start having conversations around like mental health, if we don't have conversations around like bringing other partners to think holistically, that the average activist is going to feel that trauma fatigue. And I'm questioning whether or not folks are going to be more willing to say, can we just get back to some sort of normal versus like, let's burn it down and let's reconfigure it, or let's figure out how to create a justice system that actually works for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And maybe that takes us kind of like our final, our final part.
We gotta be positive. Let's leave with something.
Let's be positive. Like, I think from our work with businesses, there have been businesses that rushed in on this and sort of put their flag in the ground. And many of those businesses and others are now taking stock. Yeah. And I think that stock taking process, almost an auditing process. What can you as a business do? What does the movement need? And, I'm really excited about one of the panels that we'll be hosting on the 29th of September, which has Virgin and JP Morgan Chase sitting on it. And that will be a panel that talks about how two organizations sat with the community and campaigners and said, what do you need? And put that on one side of the paper. And then they said, what can we do? And they put that on the other side of the paper. And they started to draw lines. Like, we would rather create change and have impact in a thoughtful way than have 100 Instagram tiles. I think it's so important that businesses use their platform to amplify the voices of campaigners. That's a retweet. That's an opportunity to speak at at a round table or a business membership organization. That should be happening. But the deep work, the careful work of figuring out what you can do and what you're going to do now needs to begin. And that can happen after a big, deep breath. But I think the hope that I have is that in 1 year's time, you know, from now, that there'll be the fruits of that labor will be kind of starting to play. And maybe the sting in the tail of this is, I think that the kind of the protests on the street will still be there enough to call to account those businesses that have not done that work and have not done that process. I guess this kind of pulls us towards the end. Jamira and I are going to be back, both of us, on the 29th of September. Jamira is going to be hosting a panel of incredible people who have all experienced the justice system directly, talking about their experiences and the work that they're doing now. I'm going to be sitting on 2 panels talking about human rights and business advocacy, and we really can't wait to see you there. Thank you so much.
Join us.